Welcome, viewers, to the Where Are They Now video series, a series that NCIDEA is publishing to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And to do so, we couldn't think of any better way to do that but to sit down with some past seed grantee founders and catch up on their accomplishments and activities since receiving the grant, at least a decade or more ago. So today, boy, am I lucky to be joined by a very accomplished one of those founders. It's Melvin Hines, who is co-founder and CEO of Durham-based Upswing, a company that's empowering historically marginalized people to achieve their life goals, specifically in educational attainment, by providing access to educational support services. Now, I know that was an inadequate kind of intro to Upswing, Melvin. So I think
That was
what
good.
we should do right from the gate, right? Like I hand it off to you, and why don't you give the proper overview of what Upswing is?
Yeah, so Upswing, we work with primarily colleges and universities to help to improve the persistence rates and ultimately the graduation rates of non-traditional students. And we find ourselves doing that by creating a wraparound student services platform that will give students of those college partners access to things like mental health supports, academic supports, counseling, success coaching, advising, basically all of the different areas that we recognize are important in order to ensure that students are on the pathway towards graduation.
To people that aren't in this space, in higher ed or academia for that matter, it may not be obvious why it's important to increase completion and success rates and graduation rates. Can you share, like I said, I think to somebody that doesn't understand that there's a lot of economical reasons that this is important, to say nothing of just society and humanity reasons. I mean, that's reason enough to justify, this kind of a service. But what's the
Mhm.
broad picture impact, of the services that you provide to these historically underserved students?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a challenge that is impacting the students as well as the colleges that they attend. Um, when we think about the impact of higher education, we usually see those graphs and charts that talk about the students who go to college and how much they make versus the students who don't go to college and how much they make. But what typically is missing in those conversations are those who started but didn't complete. And typically, for those who are attending community colleges, 75% of those students who start won't complete. For those who are attending universities, it's actually closer to about 55% who start and don't complete. Excuse me. Um, and so the challenge is that we're seeing huge swaths of the population in the United States who are actually worse off than they were when they first started college, because now they're saddled with debt. They're saddled with the fact that they didn't get to improve or advance in whatever career they were in before they started college. And we're seeing those impacts on the colleges as well. I think a lot of people tend to hear the stories of the increased competitiveness of some of the, more Ivy League institutions. But on the other side of that spectrum are community colleges, state colleges, minority serving institutions that are actually closing their doors left and right because they can't continue to fund the educational pursuits due to the fact that so many students are dropping out or just not attending in the first place. And so, what we really want to do is help support them reverse that trend and give these students a fighting chance to have that upward mobility in their lives.
Speaking of that upward mobility, if somebody just kind of like, glanced at you, like on LinkedIn, they would see a very impressive person of accomplishment. JD MBA from that little blue school. I think my shirt's matching. I try to
It's
wear the matching blue. I don't think it's blue
It'll be a
enough, is
little
it?
It could be a little darker.
Yeah, okay, that's right. Now that I think about it, it is a little bit more about that other blue school. But, JD MBA grad from Fuqua, like, that's impressive, but that wasn't your original life story. That wasn't where you started. That's what
Yeah,
you accomplished, right? And
absolutely.
I'm only teeing up, and I hope I'm not prying too much into the, personal background, but, when I was prepping for today's call, it really to me, it came through that that was part of what got you on this path to begin with. Would you care to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from a small town in South Georgia where, we didn't necessarily have all those resources that you typically maybe tend to see from some, graduates of those types of institutions. I was in a high school where 250 of us started and only 68 of us graduated. Even fewer of us went on to college. And so to me, and I think many others that were like me, just getting to college was the milestone. We didn't realize that that was the beginning of the race. And suddenly you see yourself struggling with everything from, the financial aid department to understanding these different course curriculum requirements, not knowing, what's the right career path to take. There was just so many things that we just didn't know, so many struggles. And being in that environment, I originally went to undergrad at University of Georgia, which was huge. I mean, it's a third the size of my hometown, so it was a huge institution. Um, I suddenly found myself, lost in everything else that was happening and going on, and I certainly wasn't going to be the one to raise my hand and say that I needed the help, because of what that would look like for others that look like me and others who come from my hometown. So when I really thought about where I wanted to go from here, it was how do we create resources and opportunities to support people um, who come from these small towns, who come from these areas where they're not, well represented. Um, I think you see that in the first institutions that we worked with here at Upswing. Our first 2 colleges were Bladen Community College in Bladenboro, North Carolina, and Central Carolina Community College in Henderson, and both of those colleges still work with us to this day. They're the types of students where, they're fighting against all odds as well to get an opportunity to advance their careers and have something better, to give to their kids and their loved ones. And so that's a big part of the mission behind Upswing and why we're supporting these underserved communities.
I remember I was involved in creating a program that we initially first targeted for community college. And we use it today in our mindset program. It's called the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. And one of our
Mm,
first big, first early adopters was Pikes Peak Community College in Colorado.
okay.
And they did a double blind study, like 2,000 students, took and it was specifically for their student success program, right? Which
Wow.
was a prereq for about 90% of the
Right.
incoming because 90% didn't test at grade level.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they had to go through this. And I just remember, we were doing the post mortem, so to speak, evaluation, and we saw an improvement of just under 20%. It was like 18, 19%.
Oh
The
wow.
the college president was ecstatic. He was over the moon. And I was just shamefully ignorant to his world. I just knew enough to say this looks like feels like it should be a good place to start. But he was like, Tom, these numbers are so bleak. If there was a
Yeah.
5% increase,
Yeah.
and if you could do that on a national scale, 5% increase would mean thousands of people continuing on in their academic pursuits and, making their future, their economic futures that much better. And that's
Absolutely.
really when it hit home for me. And I think it's another reason why your mission at Upswing kind of resonates with me is because it's not just good work, it's really important work.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are only, there's about 4,500 colleges and universities across the United States. What we're talking about are 4,400 of those colleges. the schools that I think people tend to think about, that are highlighted on televisions, all
Yeah.
across the country on Saturdays, those are not the majority of the colleges that people are going to. And so, yeah, that 20% that you're talking about there, I mean, that does wonders for so many communities all across this country.
Absolutely, and I think similar to Upswing, for that particular community college, they too have, not necessarily I don't think they use the language of underserved, but non-traditional, because like North Carolina, Colorado is also a very heavy military state. So, you get ostensibly, you have, like, the 40-year-old adult, in the same classroom with an 18-year-old kid that just, graduated from high school.
Exactly.
And they're
Exactly.
they're learning dynamics and styles and things are different, to say something very obvious and understated, right? For one thing, most of those kids aren't balancing a family and,
Mhm.
mortgage and car payments and everything else. So,
Yeah, it's been really interesting. It's been really interesting. So we work with about 2 dozen or so, colleges in North Carolina, and we've certainly seen that gambit. So, you're talking about the military families. We've had the opportunity to support schools like Fayetteville State, for a long time. That's very strong, with the military presence there. And so we do see, people who are, you know, kind of coming back into the civilian world and having to figure out how skills translate and being in that same classroom, like you mentioned, with an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old. Um, we've also, worked with institutions in places like in Western North Carolina where we've seen whole industries, get decimated. And suddenly people who thought that they might have lifetime fulfillment within their careers are having to figure out how to get reskilled for, nursing or for, other areas where they can ideally be able to, help support their families there as well. And they're also having to deal with the challenges of new technologies and things like that that they probably felt like they were going to be a bit absolved from having to learn. And so just those initial challenges have forced us to really think about how do we create systems and tools that are as simple as possible so that everyone can grasp them, because college itself is already challenging enough. And so you're not just thinking about how to support curriculum, you're thinking about how to support, the students who are having to endure those curriculums as well.
speaking of new technology, here at NCADA, we get hundreds of companies apply twice a year to both cycles, and we fund collectively about 45 to 50 companies between our seed and micro grants. And there's one thing of the last couple of years that has been an obvious game changer, these two little initials of A and I. And when I was thinking about, like, your Anna product, your first pillar of the Upswing
Yeah.
platform, for example, and the age, we're in the age now of personal AI bots and agents and things like that. I have to imagine AI is uh, probably a double-edged sword for y'all right now. Like, challenging in certain ways, but also wonderfully advancing, product development offerings in other ways.
Yeah, I don't think a day goes by that that's not part of the conversation. Um, it's been in fact, I actually just got off of a call where that was the conversation that we were having. Um, it's been really interesting. It's been really interesting. So we developed Anna back in 2017. So before the most recent kind of boom, and these ideas of agents, but there was another big uplift in the idea of agents back then as well, where everywhere you went, whether it was Spectrum or somewhere else, you saw suddenly this text box show up. I think that one of the things that, we've really been challenged with is, and I like that you use the term double-edged sword. We've been challenged because, many of the things that we're trying to do, which is to make academic tutoring, mental health, counseling, critical needs support, all these things available and accessible to students almost immediately, uh, isn't isn't new territory. There have always been, advisors and people like that who are helping to support students. The problem has been the cost. I remember there was this one program that was based in Baltimore that specifically was aimed to that, and for them to do that work, they basically could have one advisor support perhaps a dozen students. How do you scale that to
Right.
6,000 students in an institution? Um, it becomes unaffordable. But we know that it works, right? We know that piece works. So the question really becomes the magic of this whole technology change shift that's been taking place in the last couple of or last dozen years has been, how do we take what we know works and make it something that's scalable through the use of technology? So we've definitely been thinking about that a lot. I think, tools, like these AI tools, like, which we've used within, the support of academic supports and other things as well, has helped us to lower the cost enough that a school can support all 6,000 of their students in an affordable way, and that we've been able to help, create those retention numbers. But at the same time, the challenges have been that, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, that, you can't just kind of let it run on its own, or you can create dire consequences.
That you can.
For one example, that we've seen is that on average for our partners that use Ana, we have about 9 escalations take place per partner per year. Now, what we call escalations are things that are so challenging slash egregious that we need to get it into someone's hands before it's too late. And sometimes those amount to issues like self-harm. These come up quite a bit. I'm sure you've seen some of the stories that have taken place about how sometimes these AI tools have gotten that wrong. And so we don't feel comfortable making a service like Ana available to students where it's basically just responding without any filters to the questions that are coming into students, because we know that that happens much more increased than say pre-COVID. We know that it's increasing. And so what we'll typically do is we'll create these tools that will allow us to um, create a predictive answer, but then our support team is looking at those answers and deciding if this is the right response to the question or to the deeply held need that the student has at that point in time, so that we can become faster at what we're doing, but not um, create worse situations than these students are already going through.
That's fantastic. You referenced your team. I think if I checked, it's well over a dozen employees, and I saw you also had at least a half dozen open positions. I'm shamelessly mentioning this because I think one of the stories that doesn't get told nearly enough is the job creation engine that young, high potential startups do for the communities that they're in.
Yeah.
Um, Now that's the present. 12 years ago, it was you and Alex.
Yep.
I'd like to talk a little bit, if we could, go back down memory lane just a scotch. What I mean, what was like the ecosystem like back then? Like, how did you? Let me ask a blatantly selfish question. How did you engage with NC Idea? How is it that your path crossed with ours?
Yeah. So many of the things that I'll say do not exist anymore. So these are for the old hats in the room. But I knew that I wanted to find a way to support educational equity, those types of things. I wasn't quite sure how. I certainly didn't have the startup bug, I would say, in my mind. I just knew that I wanted to be able to be part of somewhere that was making a difference. Um, I had the opportunity to first work with the Durham public school system, and I still have no idea why why they made that decision on that on what we showed them on that day, but I'm eternally grateful for that. And that was when, we realized, okay, we probably need a dedicated place to operate. And so American Underground at this point in time was actually underground. It was in American Tobacco's campus. You had to take this elevator down,
The
and
basement.
into the basement. No windows. You didn't know if it was daytime or nighttime. Um, and I actually didn't know that that place existed. I had the opportunity to do some kind of part-time contracting work. You can call it maybe internship type work with a company that was working out of there as well. And that's when I saw the whole space, saw that this was something that existed, all those good things. So that's how I first found out about NC Idea. Um, and so I applied. We didn't get it the first year, but at that point in time, I'm not sure if this is what is still the case, but at that point in time, if you if you weren't accepted for one of the grants, you still had an opportunity, if, I guess if you showed promise to be part of Groundwork Labs, which was
Right.
also down there. And so that was our first space. That was our first workspace was working in Groundwork Labs. It was supposed to be for a certain number of weeks. We clearly outstayed the period of time we were there. John Austin was running at the time. And so then we applied a second time. Um, and that was when we were able to get the grant. And through by then we were, I think pretty well connected. We knew everyone down there. We knew all the other companies down there. Everyone was kind of helping each other out. So it was a very nascent uh environment at that point in time, but we all still kind of had you know those stars in our eyes about what this thing could be and what was unfolding at that point in time. you know I think Google for what was it called, Google for
Entrepreneurs.
entrepreneurs wasn't even there yet.
Nope.
um but obviously Durham was about to go through quite a metamorphosis over the course of the next few years. And so I'd say we were certainly glad to be part of the ground floor of that taking place.
Yeah, there's quite a distinguished list of alum who started in that windowless subterranean office space that I think besides just day or night, the one that John has told me in the past was it could be a torrential storm
Oh yeah,
going
yeah.
on, and you would just
Had no idea.
you'd walk out like you came in early in the morning and it was a nice day, and by the end of the day you're walking out and you're like, oh my, there's lightning and thunder and rain. And um, some would say that's the people that think more, wax poetically and nostalgically about entrepreneurship and that suffering is required. They would say that that's probably good for the starting ethos, so you
Right.
can really appreciate it when you're in nicer spaces that you would define as merely above ground. So,
Exactly. Exactly. Oh yeah, absolutely. You don't think of yourself, at least I didn't, as a business. You think of yourself as, or at least at that point in time, as a crazy person trying to do this crazy idea. Um, I think nowadays, we maybe see a few more success stories, and so maybe it's a little bit more legitimized, but definitely at that point in time, that's kind of how you think about it. And so it's like your parents don't really understand what you're doing. People who you went to school with don't really understand why you would go this route. And so it's really lonely. So when you're in an environment like that with other people, maybe a couple dozen others who are going down that same crazy route, and in those early days, everyone's dealing with the same struggles, right? Everyone's trying to figure out how to fund this thing. Everyone's trying to figure out, what does it look like to make your first hire? Just all those different things. It gives you that sense of uh, uh, feeling like someone has your back, basically. Uh, when when it feels like the entire rest of the world is wondering why you decide to do something so crazy. So those environments are certainly the first major ingredient that's needed, I think, in communities to be able to see something flourish like what's been happening in Durham.
I also think, and I'm not going to credit you with this. For me, one of the experiences have been I had multiple entrepreneurial endeavors. Just being part of a community provides a certain sense of accountability because
Yeah,
you kind of know that like somebody's going to miss me if I don't show up for a couple days, and they're going to ask
exactly.
me like, "What's up?" Right? Or if I'm not engaging at the normal level. And so there's those points kind of, oh, this is curious. This is how clever I am. Like clever, kind of like Anna figuring out that you might be struggling at the moment. Like there were
Right.
certain cues in the way you're using the app that says, "Hey, let's ask a question." Right?
Mhm.
Let's just scratch beneath the surface a little bit. And I think that's
Yeah.
the benefit around, community. I mean, such that I really think, and I've had this epiphany professionally years ago, that I think actually community is a form of currency. It
Oh,
can be as
absolutely.
valuable as money, even though it isn't, and
Absolutely.
it can make all the difference. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that I remember as a takeaway from the community was that if you were gone for a long enough period of time, not only were people going to ask where you've been, but because, everything sleeps and bounds in those early days, you will see that they've accomplished things that you should have accomplished. And that will make you, you know, feel some kind of way about, why didn't I stay the course? Why didn't I work harder at this? Maybe they got their first customer. Maybe they were able to move 3 paces forward in their technology. Uh, you know, Maybe they have a team now. I mean, team meaning, a couple interns, but still, you're seeing this progress take place and you're thinking, wow, we started on the same starting line. And so it gives you that accountability from that perspective as well. Uh, I remember how challenging it was to keep that piece going when we then left to get our own office. We were like, okay, we've probably been here too long.
Right.
It's probably time for someone else to to take this spot. And so,
John pushes you out of the nest. We got to
yeah,
make room.
yeah, I don't even. It probably was John's decision, not ours. And I remember we got an office, and it doesn't exist anymore. Like I said, old hats, right?
Right.
It was the old bank building that's now about to be the tallest building in downtown
Yep.
Durham. And so we were there. It was just the two of us, myself and Alex, and you could feel 180 the difference in terms of before there was that competitiveness slash collegialness with other organizations. All of a sudden, you have to figure out how to create that on your own, and it's a challenge. So I think that that currency that you're talking about. I mean, I would definitely say it pays dividends way more than dollars can in those early days.
Well, listen, I got to land this plane here in a second. So before I like to wrap these up, I'd be remiss if I didn't take somebody of your accomplishment, status, and stature, and not ask what advice, like, the Melvins of today, the people that I don't know how young you were when you started. You look still very young. I'm sure I'm way older than you, but you were younger and you were less mature than you are now just because you didn't have the life experience, right? Like, so knowing
Way more
that
naive.
we all are, I think it's required, right? If you knew fully what you were getting
Oh,
into,
yeah.
I think about half of the founders in this world would never take that first step if you knew it all.
That's true.
If you had told me someday I would make my mortgage payments with checks from my home equity line of credit so that I could cover a payroll, I would have said, "Oh no, 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 no! I'm not signing up for that."
Right.
But what advice would you, give to the up and comer right now that's looking at you and saying, boy, I sure would love to have a similar trajectory.
Yeah, I remember, there was someone who was also, always around just American Underground at that point in time, who we saw is mentors of ours. His name, I, I wonder if he's still around. His name's Scott Moody.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so he was new, I think, or newish to the community and was getting plugged in down there. And I remember there were two things that he said to me that really stuck out. The first one had to do with seeing obstacles as opportunities. And I specifically remember that because when we were first getting started at Upswing, and the video is still out there and it's very embarrassing. But before we had ever learned how to do any of the pitches and things like that with Groundwork Labs and everything else, um, we got an invite from I think Howie Reed made the connection for us to be able to do a pitch at Google's headquarters in California. And nothing was going to be paid for. It's just if you get there, there you go, that kind of thing. And so we were like, well, we have no money, so we're not going to go. And that was one of the things that Scott had said to me, that a lot of people, a lot of organizations fail because people see those opportunities and just see the work, or just see that they look like closed doors. Um, and that stuck with me so much that we ended up figuring out some sort of way. I can't remember how we raised the money, but we were able to get out to California. We did the pitch. We did very terribly. Um, but it gave us some open doors. It gave us these opportunities that we didn't know before. It gave us also a look at what things looked like over there. It taught us a lot about what kind of business we wanted to have. Um, and so every time something came across throughout these last 13 years where it felt like, well, that's kind of that's kind of it, basically. I would always think about that moment in that conversation and figure out a way to move forward with that. So that was the first thing. The second one was a tweet. I told him years later about it. But he had tweeted out, it was like Christmas or something, like Christmas Eve or whatever. Maybe it wasn't, but I'm gonna make it like it's Christmas, so it seems more
Sure. It's a
meaningful.
good story.
And so he tweeted out, um, that if you're deciding to take today off, just remember there's someone else somewhere else who is working on finding a way to beat you. And I remember reading that, and I was like, all right, I gotta get back on the grind. And so I think about that all the time as well, which is that you might not be able to see that person competing against you, wherever you are on your couch or wherever, but somewhere around this country or around the world, there's someone who's competing with you to be better at what you want to do than you are. And if you're willing to be the one to outlast them, that's how you're able to succeed. And so that's what I kept in mind as well. And I'd say those two things were certainly really good pieces of advice that helped us to be able to get where we are.
Well, I think we can close on this point, you made it so well for us. You know, that one of the probably undervalued benefits to a given ecosystem of supporting a vibrant, entrepreneurial community is exactly this, right? You are going to help people with this, video that you'll never meet, but they're going to take inspiration, not the least of which because of what you look like and who you are, right? We started the Black Entrepreneurship Council 6 years ago because we could see, it was obvious that like there was just an underrepresentation. And
Hmm.
so whether you intended or not, your success is inspiring people, and you're paying it forward just like Scott did to you,
Yeah.
right? He supported you at a time, and I think he would be touched to know that it still carries with you, and I think it's a common experience for many of us. I know I had mentors across the years. The same story about like if you're going to not work today, the way that was shared with me with a mentor was he didn't say it in the context of any given day, but he just said, remember, there's always somebody in a garage somewhere working to take you out.
Mm, yeah.
And I was just like,
Said much
well,
better than I did.
no, 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 no. I mean, it's the same principle, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to be taken out, and how dare they? And
Right.
they don't even know me. I'm a nice guy. Why would they want to take me out? But like, that's kind of the nature of the game. So, Thank you. Thank you for the time today. Congratulations on the, continued success.
I appreciate
Please
that.
know, even though you kind of are in that OG category, more than 10 years out, we still count you among the family. So if we can continue to support you in
Appreciate
any
that.
way, by the way, John retired, but we've kept him on contract. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
so if you ever need just a little bit of a walk down curmudgeon lane, as I would say, or you got to do a pitch prep. Maybe you're going to go raise, like a Series B or something bigger. He's always around to help, take you down a few pegs and shred your presentation. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
well, very good. Thank you again, Melvin. Much
Yeah.
continued success.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to the NC Idea team. As I was saying before we started, just really appreciate the fact that you all were willing to give us a chance and believe in us at a time when we were just two guys with a crazy idea.
Well, if game knows game, crazy knows crazy.
There you go.
And so it wasn't as big of a bet as you might have thought it was. All right. Well, take care.
You too.